Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. Today we are stripping back the layers of time to uncover the true dawn of Chinese civilization. We're going to look way beyond the legendary tales of gods and magic to see how ancient monumental engineering actually birthed the very first states. When we think about the birth of early empires, our minds almost automatically jump to clashing swords and brilliant generals, right? But what if we completely reframed that? Before the legendary Shah dynasty even existed, early China was shaped not just by mythical battles, but by mind-boggling infrastructure projects that literally physically laid the groundwork for empire. So let's get into it. Section 1. Legends of Early China, from sovereigns to emperors. Tracing the evolutionary leaps of early humanity is kind of like putting together a giant puzzle. We start around 3500 BCE, when the Yellow Emperor forged the embryonic form of Hoxia civilization through some pretty brutal unification battles at Banquan and Zulu. Jump forward to 2300 BCE, and we enter an era celebrated as a true golden age of governance under emperors Yao and Shun. And finally, by 2000 BCE, a figure named Yu steps onto the stage, laying the groundwork for the Shah dynasty. Moving on to Section 2, Taming the Great Flood, Engineering a Nation. Okay, so during Emperor Shun's reign, catastrophic floods were literally an existential crisis. And the response to this perfectly illustrates the trial and error of early statecraft. Shun's first appointee, a guy named Gun, basically used brute force. He stubbornly tried to block the waters with dams. Well, he failed for 9 straight years and was actually executed for it. His son, Yu, took the complete opposite approach. He worked with nature, dredging channels to guide the water out to the sea. It took 13 years of relentless, back-breaking work. Legend even says he was so devoted to this massive task that he passed his own home 3 times without ever stepping inside. Now here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Yu wasn't just moving water, think about it. To pull off a project of this sheer magnitude, coordinating labor across hundreds of disparate tribes, he had to implement centralized planning. He had to figure out complex resource allocation, establish wide-reaching communication networks, and build a permanent administrative infrastructure. By solving a massive engineering problem, Yu essentially, and almost accidentally, forced the creation of the first effective centralized state apparatus in Chinese history. But guys, here is the ultimate plot twist. Section 3. Liangzhu's super dam engineering, the 5,300-year-old secret. This is where it gets wild. Modern archaeology reveals that massive water management actually predates Yu the Great by an entire millennium. Down in the Yangtze River Delta, the prehistoric Liangzhu culture achieved a true geotechnical miracle. First, they excavated millions of tons of earth, completely without the use of a single metal tool. No way, right? But loose dirt just washes away in a flood. So they developed this brilliant engineering hack. They wrapped mud tightly in grass. This organic wrapping acted exactly like prehistoric rebar, creating incredible structural integrity that held the earth in place under immense water pressure. Using these reinforced grass and mud blocks, they constructed an intricate system of interconnected super dams for flood control and irrigation. And just how big was this system? 10 kilometers. These interconnected super dams stretch for over 10 kilometers long. I want you to just pause and let that scale sink in for a second. This is an incomprehensibly massive prehistoric engineering feat, one that legitimately rivals the scale of the Egyptian pyramids, and they pulled the whole shebang off using nothing but grass, mud, and sheer human ingenuity. Building infrastructure on this colossal scale proves something major. The Liangzhu wasn't just a loose confederation of tribes. Moving literal mountains of earth requires deep, centralized political authority, mass labor mobilization, and complex social stratification. You simply don't build a 10-kilometer dam without a highly organized, heavily structured society. It also heavily points to unified religious belief systems, which we can see in the exquisite divine man-beast face jades they left behind. These shared beliefs were the ideological glue that made this incredible feat of engineering possible in the first place. Which brings us to Section 4, the reality of early states, the dark side of the Golden Age. Ancient texts lovingly celebrate this thing called the abdication system. It's this beautiful political ideal where supreme power is passed not to a son, but to the most capable and virtuous person in the realm. The legends tell us Emperor Ya tested his chosen successor, Shun, by actually marrying him to his 2 daughters. He wanted to see how Shun managed a household before handing over the keys to the kingdom. It paints this perfect, almost utopian picture of a peaceful, merit-based transition of power. But archaeology paints a vastly different, much darker picture. Over at the Taosi site in Shanxi, which is widely considered to be Emperor Yao's capital, excavators found a pretty grim reality. They uncovered skeletal remains of noble women with signs of brutal execution. The physical evidence points directly to violent palace coups, mutilated remains, and destroyed palaces. It strongly suggests that behind this romanticized ideal of peaceful, virtuous abdication, early statehood was often forged in brutal, bloody conflict. And that leads right into Section 5, Birth of the Dynasties, Power and Revenge. That violent reality was absolutely cemented when Yu's son, Qi, just completely dismantled the abdication system. He killed the chosen successor, giving birth to China's first hereditary dynasty, the Shah. But man, it was far from stable. Emperor Taikang was such a disastrous ruler, he actually lost the kingdom to the legendary archer Hao Yi. Hao Yi then tried to rule, only to be betrayed and assassinated by his own minister Han Zhuo. Then, decades later, the exiled prince Shaokang, who was raised in hiding as a herdsman, launched a massive surprise attack to defeat Han Zhuo and finally restore his family's throne. It is an epic, multi-generational saga of betrayal, puppet kings, and ultimate revenge. Yet amidst all of this brutal state-building, palace coups, and conquest, the ancient texts preserve something incredibly profound: deep human emotion. Take the story of Emperor Shun's two queens, Yi Huang and Nu Ying. When Shun died out in the remote southern wilderness, their grief was so absolutely devastating that their weeping is said to have permanently stained the bamboos of Dongting Lake before they tragically drowned themselves. So when we analyze this massive transition from isolated tribes to centralized civilization, we see two distinct threads driving history forward. On one hand, you have the political thread, right? The Yellow Emperor's conquest, the governance of Yao and Shun, the monumental engineering of the Liangzhu dams, and the bloody coups of Hui. But inextricably linked to that is the human thread, the fierce loyalty of the two queens, the absolute sacrifice of Yu's 13 years of flood control, the incredible resilience of Shao Kang, and that profound grief echoing through the myth of the weeping bamboos. Civilization wasn't just built on earth and stone. It was built on the extremes of the human condition. Which leaves us with a real lingering mystery. As you consider the magnificent grass and mud infrastructure that literally built these early empires, alongside the brutal coups that define their politics, we have to ask, was the abdication system ever a genuine practice of early statehood, or was it merely a later invention, a beautiful myth projected backward by subsequent generations to idealize a deeply violent past? It's a question that challenges the very myths that bind a civilization together. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history beneath the legends.